Welcome back to Stellar HFY. First, I want to thank you, seriously. The support you've shown this channel lately has been incredible. And I've noticed these are the stories you connect with the most. The ones where the galaxy learns, often the hard way, what humans are capable of. Today, we're bringing you one of the most requested titles yet. This isn't a story about luck or brute force. It's about calculation, asymmetry, and a single human turning an entire Dominion propaganda event against its own creators live. Let's step into the blood arena on Targus 4. The Dominion broadcast began with no build-up, no ceremony, just a sharp cut from a news feed to the holding floor of the Targus 4 penal moon. It was a chamber of smooth alloy, lit harshly from above, designed for clarity rather than comfort. The camera's focus locked on a human in restraints, his head slightly bowed, the collar of his prison fatigues scored with wear. Rin Falk, identified only by his captured combat number, was marched between two guards, his wrists magnetically locked in front of him. There was no narration, no commentary. For the Dominion, this was the language of inevitability, the prey brought to the slaughter. His capture had been clean, almost surgical. 2 weeks earlier, he'd been deep in the Outer Rim's sabotage network, targeting Dominion relay arrays that carried encrypted fleet commands. The relay he struck on Korthos Belt had gone offline for 36 minutes, long enough for human operatives in nearby sectors to extract civilians and withdraw. But the Dominion had reacted with precision. Their counterintelligence didn't move immediately. They waited, shadowing his exfiltration route, cutting off escape lanes one by one. By the time he reached the fallback point on Lorna Station, a Dominion boarding unit was waiting, stun bolts punching through the bulkhead before the airlock even cycled. He had expected interrogation. What he got was 30 hours of isolation in a silent cube on Targus 4. Isolation was not a gap in procedure. It was part of the conditioning. The cell was soundless, lightless except for an occasional shift of dim panel glow. Food was nutrient-paced, delivered without warning, sometimes hours apart. Sleep came in fragments, but Rin knew how to measure time without clocks. The intervals between the low vibration of structural systems told him when shifts changed, when supply trams ran overhead. 30 hours gave him more than discomfort. It gave him time to think and to prepare. During processing, before isolation, he had been fitted with a standard compliance collar. Dominion procedure called for all collars to be visually inspected before being keyed live. Rin noted the battery housing, detachable, shielded, and inert until paired. When they removed the collar in the transfer bay, the guards didn't bother to check the seam of his fatigues. The battery pack, now hidden under a crude stitch he'd added using a single thread from his cot, went undetected. Dominion oversight didn't miss it because they weren't looking. In their mind, the fight was over the moment a human was scheduled for the blood arena. The march to the arena was a calculated display, and every step was broadcast. Two guards in full Dominion armor escorted him along a narrow transit bridge suspended over the arena floor. Below, the blood arena spread in perfect symmetry, a circle divided by shifting panels, half inlaid metal, half high-friction composite. Segmented walls rotated in program sequences, breaking sight lines every few seconds. Energy pylons anchored the outer edges, cycling arcs of plasma through their lattices at fixed intervals. From above, it looked like a testing chamber. From inside, it was a controlled kill zone. The Dominion didn't design it for fairness. They designed it to humiliate, to display how even a dangerous species could be reduced to prey when placed under proper conditions. Rin's boots hit the arena surface with the muted thud of isolation. The guards withdrew quickly, their exit platform retracting behind them, sealing the entry hatch. For a moment, he was alone. The arena lights shifted to a neutral wash, the segmented walls beginning their programmed rotation. The hum of the pylons marked time like a clock, steady, relentless. Somewhere above, in the invisible stands behind the filtered viewports, Dominion citizens leaned forward to watch. He didn't need to see them to know how they were reacting. They'd seen humans here before. Most matches ended in under 15 minutes, 2 at most. Some humans fought hard, but the environment always tipped the balance. Rin had seen these feeds during his years in the Resistance. He had memorized the patterns, the positions where enforcers liked to push their prey, The choke points where the rotating walls created brief dead zones. The magnetic lock at his wrist disengaged with a mechanical snap. His hands fell free. He rolled his shoulders, stretching the muscles carefully, aware of every camera tracking his movement. He didn't pace or posture. He stood near the central rotation point, letting the arena's mechanisms turn slowly around him. His mind cataloged the movement of each wall segment, noting the timing of gaps. He checked the position of the pylons, their arcs of plasma cycling in predictable bursts. Above, the first gate opened. Dominion enforcers stepped through, 8 in total, moving in a measured wedge formation. Their armor was painted in the matte gray of arena detail, functional without insignia. Each carried a shock pike, a weapon designed for incapacitation first, with lethal power as a secondary function. This was not meant to be war. It was meant to be demonstration. The crowd, though invisible, reacted audibly through the broadcast audio feed. The hum of conversation shifted to a low pulse of anticipation as the enforcers spread out, taking positions around Rin. The Dominion broadcast script didn't require commentary. The formation itself was meant to be the story. 8 armed soldiers surrounding a lone human combatant in a space engineered to limit his movement. Rin's eyes tracked them without sudden movement. He didn't rush. He didn't run. The arena's rotating walls began their cycle again, the panels sliding into place, closing some lanes while opening others. He stepped toward a cluster of rotating panels at the western edge, not at a run, but at a steady walk. The enforcers adjusted formation, angling to drive him into the narrow crescent where the panels created a corral. It was what he wanted. He moved without speaking, his hands at his sides, his posture loose but balanced. The shock collar battery pressed against his ribs beneath the seam of his fatigues, a faint weight that meant timing mattered. As the panels rotated, the pylons fired another sequence, a pulse of energy cycling into the lattice. He stepped into the shadow of the rotating wall, the geometry momentarily breaking line of sight for 2 of the enforcers. The match had begun, but it hadn't yet turned into combat. This was the Dominion's opening spectacle, an orderly engagement meant to end in a clean takedown. 8 enforcers, 1 human, in a field where every variable was controlled. The Dominion audience had no reason to believe this fight would last beyond the first shift of wall rotation. Rin had every reason to think otherwise. The 8 Dominion enforcers began to close in, their formation as precise as a military drill. They moved as a wedge, 2 forward, 2 flanking on each side, and 2 anchoring the rear, forming a tightening arc designed to compress their target into the arena's western crescent. This wasn't random. It was the standard play for an audience. The humans who ended up here usually bolted or lashed out in desperation, falling exactly where the formation wanted them. Rin didn't bolt. He stepped backward in a controlled stagger, as if his balance was fading under pressure. To the enforcers, it looked like disorientation, the kind that followed 30 hours of sensory isolation. His shoulders rolled forward, his footing uneven, every move calculated to match the body language they expected. His path angled toward the rotating panels of the West Cluster, the same trap that had claimed dozens of fighters before him. As the walls rotated into position, one of the forward enforcers advanced aggressively, closing the gap. His pike's tip pulsed faintly with an active charge, calibrated to incapacitate on contact. The moment the wall slid between them, breaking the line of sight of the others for just 3 seconds, Rin's right hand dipped to the seam of his fatigues. His fingers closed around the shock collar battery. The timing wasn't guesswork. It was muscle memory from dozens of mental rehearsals. The pylon's hum shifted as it cycled, a deep, predictable pulse that aligned with the arena's rotation sequence. Rin moved in those same 3 seconds, the battery pressed against the enforcer's pike coupler, just as the pylon's energy discharge peaked. The coupler's insulation wasn't designed to handle interference at that point in its cycle. The weapon backfired violently, a flash of blue energy arcing down its length. The enforcer's armor lit with discharge, and he collapsed instantly, the pike clattering to the arena floor. The crowd's noise, piped faintly through the arena's environmental system, spiked, not in panic, but in surprise. A kill this early wasn't unprecedented, but it usually came from an enforcer finishing the fight, not falling at the first engagement. Rin didn't pause. He dropped to one knee beside the downed enforcer, his fingers working quickly. He stripped the left shoulder plate from the armor, its curve and density enough to deflect a glancing strike. The pike he took in his right hand, testing its weight as he moved deeper into the shadow of the rotating panels. The formation adjusted. The rear pair began to shift inward, tightening their circle. But the rotating walls worked against them. Every 5 seconds, a panel blocked a direct line of sight, forcing them to stagger their movements. Rin used those gaps like terrain, moving just out of view at the moment they were reorienting. The second enforcer came in from his left, moving cautiously now, his pike angled for a thrust. Rin stepped sideways as the wall rotated, letting the enforcer overcommit into the narrowing lane. The pike extended, its energy tip passing within centimeters of Rin's chest. He caught the shaft with his armored forearm, twisting sharply to redirect the momentum. The enforcer stumbled forward into the closing panel edge. The arena didn't stop for combatants. Its panels were weighted for rotation, and the closing edge struck with enough force to knock the enforcer off balance. Rin stepped in, driving the stolen pike upward in a short, brutal arc. The strike connected with a seam at the underarm joint, bypassing the armor's primary reinforcement. The second enforcer collapsed, his weapon falling silent. Rin moved quickly again, dragging him back into the panel's shadow before the others could see the exact motion. 2 kills. The formation broke its symmetry now. The flanking enforcers tightened their position, moving to box him in completely. But Rin wasn't standing still. He ducked between 2 panels just as they rotated, the narrow gap cutting him from their view. The moment the wall passed, he was already moving along the back of the arena's crescent, forcing them to turn and follow through more constricted angles. The third enforcer tried to cut him off, moving ahead of the rotation pattern, but the arena's timing worked against overconfidence. Rin shifted position just as a pylon discharge flared, its energy arc lancing across the gap between 2 panels. The enforcer halted abruptly, his line of approach cut by the hazard. Rin closed in during the hesitation, the shoulder plate raised to deflect the initial strike. The pike's energy tip glanced off the plate, dissipating in a flash of heat. Rin stepped into the opening, ramming the butt of his pike into the enforcer's chest. The force drove the Dominion fighter backward, into the live arc of the pylon's residual charge. The armor's insulation wasn't meant for prolonged exposure. The enforcer stiffened, weapon falling from his hand as his systems overloaded. The third enforcer went down without ceremony, the crowd noise spiking again. From the outside, it didn't look like chaos. It looked controlled, but not by the Dominion. Every engagement ended in isolation. Every strike was timed with the arena's own rhythm. What should have been a clean demonstration of superiority was turning into a methodical dismantling. The remaining 5 enforcers tightened their formation again, switching from the slow compression tactic to a staggered advance. But their spacing was wrong now, the gaps between them wider, their lines of sight broken more frequently by the rotating walls. The arena's mechanisms, built for theatrical dominance, had become Rin's cover. At the 1-hour mark, 3 Dominion combatants were down, their bodies lying in the shadowed edges of the arena floor. Rin stood in the narrow lane between 2 panels, the stolen pike held low, the shoulder plate strapped across his left arm. His breathing was steady, his eyes tracking the movement of the remaining enforcers. The fight wasn't over, but the rhythm had changed. The spectacle the Dominion expected was already gone. The Dominion wedge was no longer a wedge. What had started as a coordinated advance had shifted into a looser formation, the kind of improvised positioning that combatants fell into when the script started to slip. The remaining enforcers had abandoned the clean choreography that dominated most arena bouts. They moved more cautiously now, their pikes still leveled, but the lines between them had gaps that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. The deaths of 3 trained fighters in under an hour weren't just casualties. They were a breach in the confidence that the arena's outcome was inevitable. Rin stayed mobile, never remaining in one lane long enough for them to coordinate. The panels continued their steady rotation, every movement opening and closing sightlines at set intervals. He kept to the sections he had marked in his head, the ones that cycled most directly toward the arena's retractable platforms. The Dominion designed them to retract suddenly during the fight to force prey into open ground, but the same mechanism created a hard hazard for anyone caught off balance. One of the remaining enforcers broke rank, angling in to intercept him as he passed near a narrowing lane. It was a calculated move, the enforcer trying to anticipate the panels and force Rin into the open. But Rin had been waiting for someone to commit. As the panel completed its cycle, Rin pivoted, drawing the enforcer's momentum forward. The retractable platform behind them clicked as its edge disengaged, the surface retracting in a smooth mechanical pull. The Dominion fighter realized too late that his footing was on a section that was no longer fully supported. Rin shifted his weight, forcing the enforcer to step deeper onto the platform to stabilize his attack. The mechanical retraction completed its cycle, the platform dropping away by less than half a meter, but enough to unbalance a fighter mid-strike. Rin drove the butt of his pike into the enforcer's chest at the same instant, the force combining with the drop to send him backward into the platform's recess. The impact was solid, the armor plating taking most of it, but the sudden displacement put the fighter at a lethal disadvantage. The next rotation of the panels sealed the section, cutting him from support. When the panel opened again seconds later, the enforcer was still, his pike lying a meter away. 4 kills. The fight had shifted. The audience could feel it, even through the broadcast filter. What had started as entertainment was becoming uncomfortable. The Dominion arena was built on the promise of controlled superiority, yet here a lone human was dismantling their enforcers one at a time without chaotic brawling or random luck. This was methodical. That made it harder to dismiss. Above the arena, the control deck was alive with motion. Overseer Vorak stood at the primary operations console, his eyes on the incoming data feed. He didn't speak to the crowd. His work was to manage the event, not narrate it, but the tone of his posture had shifted. The human was alive at the hour mark, 4 enforcers were down, and the feed numbers from off-world networks had spiked. The Dominion's propaganda strategy was to broadcast the superiority of their forces as a cultural constant. What they were showing now didn't align with that message. Vorak's aides flagged the external feeds for possible delay, but Dominion protocol was rigid. To cut or stall a live Blood Arena broadcast without a procedural trigger would cause more suspicion than the anomaly itself. The bureaucracy was designed to prevent tampering that could be exploited by enemies. But in this case, it also prevented them from cleaning up their own image. The humans' fight was going out live to Dominion loyalist worlds and neutral observers. In the arena, the hesitation was growing. The 4 remaining enforcers were no longer pressing aggressively. Their spacing was wider, their advance slower. Each step forward seemed checked by a glance at the panels, at the pylons, at the retractable surfaces. The clean kill choreography had been abandoned. The audience murmurs shifted from the rhythmic rise and fall of entertainment to something more fractured. The sound carried faintly through the arena's audio bleed. No words, just tone. The shift was subtle, but it was there. The Dominion citizens had expected another quick victory, a confirmation of the order of things. Now they were watching as one of their core symbols of dominance. The Blood Arena itself was being used against its own combatants. Rin kept moving, but he wasn't rushing. He knew the timing now. The walls rotated at predictable intervals, the pylons fired at fixed cycles, and the retractable platform shifted with a set delay. He didn't need to fight all 4 at once. He just needed them to keep reacting to him, to the arena, and to each other. By the end of the hour, Rin had positioned himself near the central pivot again, the pike still in his grip, the scavenged armor plate still strapped to his arm. 4 Dominion enforcers lay incapacitated or dead across the floor, each in a position that told a story of calculated disadvantage rather than brute force. The crowd's energy had shifted from mockery to disbelief. This wasn't a story the Dominion intended to tell, but it was the one unfolding live. The match wasn't over, but the first hour had ended, and the arena was no longer just a stage. It was a problem. At the 60-minute mark, the Dominion control deck was no longer a place of routine oversight. Overseer Vorak's posture was rigid, his secondary monitors alive with alerts from communications officers who were watching the numbers climb on the live feed. 4 enforcers were down, the match was still active, and the human, by all conventional calculation, should have been neutralized in the opening quarter hour. The optics were collapsing. Vorak issued a direct order over the internal channel. The arena security team was to breach the combat zone and overwhelm the human. There was precedent. In cases where an anomaly threatened the broadcast stability, reinforcements had been deployed mid-match to restore the event's direction. It was a calculated move meant to crush the anomaly under force. The order was received by Guard Commander Tarek at the breach point. His unit was already positioned outside the west entry hatch, their weapons primed, their armor configured for close-quarter suppression. But the breach didn't initiate. The internal systems flagged a red protocol lock. Rin's earlier pulse discharge had not only neutralized an enforcer's weapon, it had overloaded a subsection of the arena's pylon control loop. The safety fields protecting the entry pathways were no longer stable. Without a full recalibration, entry was a lethal gamble. The energy flux could shear through an armored suit in seconds. Tarek acknowledged the order, but his voice was steady as he replied that entry without recalibration suits was a direct violation of operational safety protocol. Vorak countered, pointing out the urgency of the situation. Tarek did not raise his voice, but the refusal was final. His men would not breach under unstable conditions. They were not arena enforcers bound by spectacle. They were garrison personnel, and every word of the exchange was being captured by the live feed's secondary audio. The refusal was no longer just operational. It was visible to every viewer in the Dominion's network. Inside the arena, the two remaining enforcers shifted tactics. They had seen the pattern. Rin's kills came when he forced them into confined engagements. Closing on him at melee range had already cost them 4 of their number. They switched to range suppression, their shock pikes collapsing into shorter configurations with mounted projectile capacitors. The weapons discharged high-velocity arcs designed to stun or kill at distance without the vulnerability of close combat. Rin didn't try to charge them. He shifted toward the eastern sector of the arena, where the pylon's lattice had shown instability during the earlier overload. The unstable section pulsed with a slightly different cadence, its arcs erratic enough to register as a hazard to anyone who understood the system. The enforcers pursued, their shots lancing across the rotating lanes, forcing Rin to move in a constant rhythm to avoid being pinned. Every movement was calculated to draw them closer. Rin's shoulder plate took a glancing hit, the impact numbing his arm briefly but leaving the armor intact enough for continued use. He adjusted his pace, staying just far enough ahead to keep them firing, the projectiles striking closer each time. The unstable pylon cycled again, its charge spiking. Rin moved into a lane where the lattice's arc left a narrow gap in coverage, just wide enough for a fighter who had memorized its timing to pass safely. The enforcers followed, firing at his back. The projectiles struck the lattice edge, and the unstable charge rebounded in a violent flare. Energy arcs split in unpredictable angles, lashing out across the lane. The first enforcer took a full arc across the chest plate. His armor absorbed the initial strike, but the unstable rebound carried a secondary charge that overloaded his suit's capacitors. His body seized, the pike falling from his grip as he crumpled to the arena floor. The second enforcer tried to halt his advance, but his forward momentum had already carried him into the danger zone. A second discharge from the lattice caught his weapon arm, the shock forcing his pike to fire involuntarily. The weapon's feedback loop completed the circuit, incapacitating him instantly. Rin stepped out of the lane as the pylon cycled down, his movement precise, controlled. Behind him, both enforcers lay motionless, their armor scorched in irregular patterns where the lattice's arcs had struck. 6 kills. The arena was silent except for the steady mechanical rotation of the panels and the hum of the pylons. The crowd's reaction was subdued now, not the sharp bursts of noise that had accompanied the earlier kills. The Dominion's arena spectacle had shifted from dominance to damage. Control, but there was no damage control available while the feed ran live. Rin didn't celebrate or posture. He moved back toward the central sector, his breathing even, the pike still held low in his hand. There were no more immediate threats on the floor, but he knew the match wasn't over until the command declared it so. And the command, bound by its own protocols, had just been refused by its own guards. Hour 2 had begun not with overwhelming force, but with hesitation, refusal, and 2 more dead enforcers. The arena floor told the story more clearly than any broadcast could. The fight was still active, but the Dominion's control over its own spectacle was breaking apart. On the control deck, Overseer Vorak stood with one hand braced against the console. His eyes stayed fixed on the tactical layout of the arena floor. The guards had refused to breach, 6 enforcers were down, and the human was still standing. Direct intervention was off the table, but Dominion protocol had contingencies. Vorak issued the next order in a clipped tone, bypassing every intermediate officer. Gas dispersal. It was a clean failsafe, built into the arena walls for moments when the match needed to be ended without visible interference from new combatants. The vents were hidden in the wall structures, designed to flood the interior with a fast-spreading, immobilizing agent. The compound wasn't subtle. It incapacitated any unshielded target in seconds, paralyzing the respiratory and motor systems long enough for extraction. In the Dominion playbook, it was as close to certain as a controlled system could get. Rin didn't hear the order, but he saw the shift. The vents along the lower walls were subtle in appearance, but he had spent time on Targus 4 before the arena. His cell block had been on the same structural deck, and a malfunction in its environmental control weeks earlier had exposed him to the vent arrangement when a repair crew disassembled a section for maintenance. He didn't know every detail, but he knew enough to recognize the intake and release points. He moved toward the section where a damaged panel had been replaced during that repair, his pike still in hand. His eyes tracked the seams of the wall as he crossed the arena floor. The vents would release in a fixed sequence, the same in every arena across the Dominion's territories. There was no time to dismantle them, but there didn't need to be. Rin drove the butt of the pike into the base of the vent grill. The alloy was resilient, but it wasn't built to withstand a concentrated wedge from close range. The panel buckled just enough for him to insert the shaft, using it as a lever to pry the grill upward. The damaged frame gave way with a metallic snap, the vent opening slightly ahead of its release cycle. He positioned the scavenged armor plate between himself and the opening, angling it so the first concentrated wave of dispersal would be deflected. The compound wasn't a gas. In the traditional sense, it was a pressurized mist that spread outward in a rapid cone. The armor plate created a directional barrier, forcing the first wave to shoot laterally toward the center lane, where the 2 remaining enforcers had taken position. The dispersal cycle engaged. A low hiss echoed through the arena, almost lost beneath the rotation of the panels. The first wave burst from the open vent, striking the plate and redirecting in a concentrated stream across the arena floor. The enforcers had been scanning for a physical advance, not environmental hazards. By the time the mist reached them, there was no space or cover to avoid it. The first enforcer staggered mid-step, his weapon lowering as his limbs locked. His body seized in seconds, the immobilizing agent overwhelming his suit's filtration systems. The second tried to retreat, moving toward the clearer lanes, but the compound spread faster than he could move. His weapon fell from his hand as he collapsed, his armor plates thudding against the arena floor. Rin held position until the dispersal cycle ended, his plate still angled, his breathing controlled. The hiss faded, replaced by the constant mechanical rhythm of the arena. He lowered the plate, scanning the floor. Both enforcers were motionless, 7 and 8. The arena was silent, not the silence of mechanical failure, but the absence of the crowd's earlier energy. There were no bursts of noise, no steady pulse of conversation. The Dominion spectacle, designed to display dominance, had turned into a broadcast of a complete tactical breakdown. Rin stepped back toward the central pivot, the pike held loosely in his hand. The match was still active, but there were no more opponents on the floor. The immobilizing gas had neutralized the last of the enforcers. The control deck would have to make a choice: declare the match concluded or risk the feed showing more hesitation than they could afford. For the first time in the match, the Dominion had nothing left to deploy. The spectacle wasn't a display of their superiority anymore. It was proof, recorded in every frame of the broadcast, that their own systems could be turned against them in real time. The silence wasn't just in the arena, it was in the audience, in the control deck, and across every off-world feed where the match was still streaming without interruption. The fight wasn't over because of a scripted victory. It was over because the Dominion had no clean way to end it. The arena's silence did not last long. The Dominion could not allow a live broadcast to linger indefinitely on an image of their own fighters incapacitated on the floor. A short signal cut the feed on the arena floor, replacing it for most viewers with the neutral insignia of the Dominion Authority. In the stands, those who had witnessed the fight directly were ushered out with precision, their expressions unreadable under the controlled lighting. On the arena deck, however, the focus turned immediately to containment. Two heavy extraction units entered, their protective suits sealed, their movements mechanical. They approached Rin without weapons raised, their task not execution, but removal. He was ordered to kneel, the instruction delivered in the clipped, formal cadence of a unit whose purpose was not to engage. His pike was taken, his armor plate discarded. The magnetic restraints locked around his wrists once more. Rin did not resist. Resistance wasn't necessary. He understood what the Dominion was doing. His survival had become a liability that couldn't be solved by killing him in the same arena that had just broadcast his victory to half the sector. Executing him there would only sharpen the narrative that was already taking form outside their control. He was moved through an auxiliary corridor beneath the arena floor, the sound of his boots echoing against the walls. He did not look back. The official Dominion channels moved quickly to contain the damage. Within hours, the Blood Arena match was declared a rare procedural anomaly. The language was exact, the intent clear, to suggest that the outcome had been the result of an extraordinary deviation. Not a flaw in Dominion superiority, but the problem was not the official channels. The problem was the independent feeds. The match had been mirrored in real time by fringe world networks, off-world traders, and civilian archivists. The footage was circulating unaltered, replayed in slow motion, every move dissected by viewers who were not interested in Dominion excuses. On the fringe worlds, those territories where the Dominion's hold was weaker, the footage became more than entertainment. It became study material. Resistance groups analyzed the fight in detail. Each segment of the arena's layout, each timing of the panels, each pylon discharge, each hesitation in enforcer tactics was cataloged. The focus was not on the spectacle of one human fighter, but on the doctrine implied by his victory: environmental exploitation, procedural manipulation, and morale disruption. The Dominion's leadership could not ignore the implications. The Guard's refusal to breach the arena during Hour 2 was documented in internal records as a procedural precedent, proof that under certain conditions, even trained Dominion personnel would hesitate to act against a human in a controlled environment. It was not a narrative the Dominion wanted to spread, but it was a fact they could not erase. Weeks later, the Dominion's strategic classification records were updated. Humans were formally reclassified, their threat designation raised to align with species considered combat priority anomalies. The term Deathworlder was entered into the classification database, not as a cultural insult, but as a formal military term. The justification cited the Targus 4 incident, the Guard's refusal to enter, and the subsequent tactical fallout as key factors. Rin Falk's name was never released in Dominion records. In official documentation, he remained Human Combatant 47 Delta, but in independent networks, his name was known. His fight was not treated as legend or myth. It was treated as precedent, a single example of what a human combatant could do when given environment, opportunity, and reason. In the high security block where he was transferred, Rin sat in a cell designed for containment, not for comfort. The walls were plain alloy, the lighting steady, the air silent except for the distant hum of the facility's life support systems. He did not pace. He sat on the edge of the narrow bench, his hands resting loosely on his knees. The arena had been one fight, but it had changed more than the outcome of a single match. It had shifted perception, and in the Dominion, perception had weight. He knew he would not walk free, but he also knew the fight on Targus 4 had already moved beyond him. The Dominion's own systems had turned his survival into a wider problem, one they would not be able to contain so easily. His fight had altered not just his fate, but the standing of humanity in a galaxy that now saw them differently. In the quiet of the cell, Rin understood what the Dominion feared most. This would not be the last time. If this fight in the Blood Arena sent chills down your spine, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories just like this. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Rin Falk's place, one human against the Dominion, what environmental trick would you use to turn the arena against your enemies? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where strategy turns the impossible into victory. See you in the next story.